Start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another edition of the Agora Discourse. My name is Hagai Matsko. I'm a journalist, and I work at Agora as the head of investigations. Our topic today is emerging developments in political parties ahead of the 2026 elections. We are going to discuss a number of things. The recent developments within political parties. As you may already know, some of the political parties, most of them, have been electing new leadership and doing other processes that will lead to the elections in 2026. We'll also discuss the recent amendment of the Political Parties and Organizations Act. We will look at which the amendments were passed on May 20 of this year. We will look at its implications. We will look at the current state of political party support within Uganda, and we'll look at the other emerging issues. On the panel today, I have Job Kaija. Job Kaija is a governance expert. He's followed these processes. We also have Frederick Golowa Mutebi. He doesn't like it when you add doctor. But thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. I will ask you to just say a quick hello, and we get into the thick of it. Job, let's start with you.
Okay, Hagai, can you hear me?
Very well.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen on this space. I'm very happy to be hosted by you, Agora, and to be speaking to everybody that has tuned in.
Thank you, Job. Frederick?
Hi, Hagai. I'm here. I'm very happy to be on this space and happy to be engaging on this subject.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. A lot more people are going to join us, but I'll just give a brief introduction. It's 2 decades, almost 2 decades, since 2005, when a national referendum returned Uganda to multi-party competition, lifting a ban on the activities of political parties that had been placed since by the National Resistance Movement in 1986. The decision to restore multipartism, as some of us may recall, followed agitation internally. So Ugandans wanted political parties to return. And there was also international pressure because partners that support a democratic dispensation needed Uganda to exercise political pluralism, or the idea that different elements are within a society, multiple groups with diverse interests and beliefs should coexist and participate in political processes. This idea is important because apart from the representation of various elements within society in policy making, it emphasizes inclusivity and tolerance. But as we head into the upcoming elections in 2026, a lot of people think multipartyism doesn't exist, and Uganda is seen as less democratic. You've seen some of the things that have been happening in different political parties. The National Unity Platform has been raided several times by security operatives. Some of its members have been imprisoned, tortured, and the people in the establishment in government have openly bragged about this and threatened to even murder some of the leaders of these political parties. Then recently, on May 21st this year, Parliament passed the amendments to the Political Parties and Organizations Act, that is now a bill, despite protests from opposition members of Parliament who even walked away. The law, of course, among others, elevates the International Party Organization for Dialogue, otherwise called IPOD, to a statutory body, while also distinguishing between political parties with representation in Parliament and those without. Under the amended law, only, and this is very important, only parties in Parliament that align themselves with IPOD, or an element of IPOD called the Consultative Forum, will be eligible to receive government funding. I'll get into the government funding that these parties have been getting, but there's been also the contestations within political parties. The Democratic Party had its delegates conference, elected its leadership, but there were contestations there. Of course, the Honorable Norbert Mao, was re-elected. And some of the people who are challenging him have since announced that they'll be going to court because that process didn't follow the party's constitution. There have also been murmurs within the National Unity Platform. You saw a breakaway from the National Unity Platform. The Honorable Matthias Mpuga, the former leader of opposition, started a new political party. We saw a similar development with the FDC. I will go to my panelists now. I think that's enough background. They are our experts. I imagine as me, you're anxious to hear what they have to say. And I'll start with you, Job Kaija. What have you been observing in the latest political processes ahead of the 2026 elections within political parties that concerns you or gives you optimism?
Thank you, Haggai. I think for me, of course, at IDEA where I work, we've been following some of these political trends across the country, but also specifically within the political parties. And I'll speak a bit about that work at some point. But I think really from the background that you're giving, it's important for us to point out that political parties, just like other institutions in the country, are victims or a victim of the prevailing political context. It's not a mistake that the bill that you are making reference to, and I don't know whether it has been assented to as yet, was passed in a rushed manner, the same manner or similar manner as the UPDF Amendment Act was passed, and I think they were passed even on the same day. Introduced at the same time, passed on the same day. Now, it's not really, it shouldn't surprise you. It should actually tell you that the UPDF Act that we really made a lot of noise about and brings a lot of nostalgic sentiments is basically designed to achieve the same purpose that the amendment to the Political Parties and Organizations Act was passed to achieve. So in the alternate, I mean, they are passed more as alternates. If this one doesn't work, then the other one will work. But I wanted to speak broadly about the prevailing political context, which really these political parties are also victims to. First, you realize that, of course, we are operating for over the past 4 decades. We have been operating in a politics that has been largely vulgarized by a 4-decade regime, whose major preoccupation is nothing but really regime survival, regime longevity. And at the core of this survival is, of course, the politics of patronage, clientelism, divide and rule, and violence, which I mean you've spoken about. Right now, to run a political party is almost like declaring that you have launched a guerrilla warfare against the current establishment. And it's this kind of context that really all the different institutions, including political parties, must really operate in. Now, of course, you did mention to the return to multi-party politics 2 decades back. But you know that initially, before that, and foundationally, when the NRA captured power, I think the first thing they did was to abolish political parties. And then they created their own alien system, or if you may like to say unique system. I think they call it unique system of governance, which I don't think has operated anywhere else, but maybe Dr. Golova Mutebi, who has probably read more about this subject and actually help us to understand whether there is any other country where a movement system of government has worked. But I think, for me, the only place I have read of is here in Uganda. So Museveni came and established his thing, which I think, I remember when Bobby Wine was starting his crusade, which he was calling, we are removing a dictator. He was calling it Robert Doba style. And Robert Doba, I think in his view, was this is something which is disorganized, amoebic, but intended to meet certain objectives. And of course, time and again, President Museveni has also himself alluded to being a muyekera. Each time he's trying to make a threat, or he's trying to challenge those that are putting up some resistance against him, he always refers to himself as a muyekera. And so he has been running this muyekera system. And so I think for me, it would be foolhardy to expect that such a system could allow organized political parties to flourish. So actually, at the moment, I don't think we even ever return to a multi-party system of government. I believe that we are still in a movement system, but pretending to be operating a multi-party political system. Now, if I were to point out one area where this regime can be credited as having achieved, I think it is in the destruction of institutions. me and you know that probably there's no single institution that you can point to and agree that it can function as it is supposed to. Specifically, if you are referring to political parties, I will take you to institutions of citizenship, which have been deliberately destroyed by subjecting them to a set of draconian laws, denying them the required resources, and for those that are state governed, like the Human Rights Commission and others, you will find that they've been filled up with either incompetent or even regime clients that can't function independently, but rather pay allegiance to the regime. And those are the people that are either leading these institutions or working in these institutions. Now, in terms of the destruction of citizenship that I spoke about, of course, we started by destroying citizen agency through banning of civics. I don't know, Hagai, when you went to school, but for me and probably Dr. Golova Mutebi will tell you that we studied something called civics, which I think at some point was a separate subject, but myself, by the time I went to primary school, we were doing it as part of SST. Now, that was one foundational subject that was helping citizens to become competent citizens, to understand their civic rights, civic duties, civic participation. And from that, you'd actually realize or understand or appreciate the need to actually engage in political participation or even engage in political parties. Political education used to be a subject that was offered in, I think, O level. That was scrapped off our curriculum. And of course, what that shows is that you have crafted an education system that has killed the whole concept of citizenship, civic agency, and even citizenship, if I might say. Of course, that concept was vulgarized with what we used to call the patriotism clubs. I don't know what they are doing right now with those clubs, but for some people that participated in them, if you talk to them now, they will tell you that actually these were just more like, I think they were doing Mchaka Mchaka, the NRM ideology, training that is done in Kiankwanzi, etc. Now, civic spaces have also been captured. If you go to City Square, where citizens used to go, I recall back in the day, if you wanted to maybe demonstrate against something or protest, you'd actually go to City Square. Right now, it is barricaded with military hardware. The independence grounds at Kololo are governed under SFC. The Freedom Square at Makerere at some point was inaccessible. I don't know whether it is still accessible at this point. But also, if you went across countries in Uganda, especially districts, especially the traditional districts, we used to have what they call the bombers grounds. Right now, actually, they are still there. But these grounds, these were spaces where you could go in case you wanted to express yourself about an issue or even gather and meet. These were the spaces where you'd go and meet. Right now, they are also really barricaded. If you went there right now, actually, it's possible that you could be tear gassed or driven out by military vehicles. At institutions of learning, in some institutions like the Uganda Christian University, you can't even campaign under a political party banner. In other places like I think Makerere, still it is not possible for you to organize a political rally under a political banner. Now, if you look at that kind of context, the different things I've been talking about, traditionally, that is where young people would have really been able to hone their political participation. And I think entities like the Uganda Young Democrats, which has raised the number of most of the active politicians that you are seeing now, the likes of Mwanga Chivumbi, Mathias Impuga, etc., are all products of that kind of process, which deliberately over time has been killed either through the education system or through other draconian laws and draconian actions by this current regime. The NRM itself is actually a victim to this system, which has been vulgarized. It suffers a lot from the challenges that I've already alluded to. I'm sure that, I don't know whether Haga you remember, around, I think it was 2011, there's a certain Captain Ruhinda Maguru who threatened to contest for the chairpersonship of the NRM. I think he was arrested. I don't know where he is right now, but internally in the party, they could not allow this competition to be able to take place. You all remember the story of John Patrick Amama Mbabazi when he wanted to contest for chairmanship of the NRM, and then later, of course, for the presidential flag bearer for the NRM. You all remember how he was fought, and I think what followed then was the declaration of the sole position, chairmanship of that position of the NRM, but then also the sole candidature of for the NRM in terms of whom they fielded for the presidential. So the chairperson position has been blocked off for one individual, but also in order for you to contest and, on behalf of the NRM, that position has also been blocked up or preserved for a certain individual. As we speak, the primaries of Zimbabwe have not taken place at different levels because apparently there's been something around the politics there between PLU and the NRM, and now they tell you the register has been messed up, etc. The Bukedia woman MP position, right now, of course, we've seen that nominations for the NRM are ongoing. A certain Helen Akol was disqualified under really strange circumstances. First, her name was strangely omitted from the register, and then finally it was put back. But before we knew it, they disqualified her, saying that I think she doesn't reside in that constituency, but she only owns land there. I don't know whether there's actually any law that deters me from contesting in a constituency where I don't own a home. But she was technically omitted, and that her seat has been declared the current Speaker of Parliament has been declared as a sole candidate for that constituency. Now, there are a couple of other issues that I could just quickly touch. One is financing for political parties. I haven't yet read the new law.
Job,
Yep.
may I
Yes,
ask
yes.
you hold it there? I'll get back to you. I need to go to Golowa for a bit and then come back to you, if you don't mind.
Okay. No worries.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention quickly that Ruhinda Magula interviewed him in 2010, and he told me that Museveni summoned him to State House in October 2010 and to discuss his bid. Ruhinda Magulu told me that Museveni told him that he was threatened to leave the NRM. He said that he was going to leave the NRM and run independently and see what Ruhinda Magulu would do. So I just wanted to mention that briefly to extend your point. I'll come to you, Frederick. We are discussing political parties now, but some people wonder whether they are still relevant as vehicles for mobilization, organizing political processes. I'll go into the data from Afrobarometer at a certain point, but I just wanted to bring us quickly to a tweet you posted on X on December 15th, 2023. It reads, "Once upon a time, political parties in Uganda were built on ideas. The ideas attracted people to them. People made the parties and sustained them. Today, some parties are special purpose vehicles for their leaders. Many people join and defect for money or positions. Zero commitment." That was your tweet. I'd like you to give a bit of context of how multipartism returns and how we arrive at such a tweet that you made.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hagai. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very, very well.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. And I've listened to Job, and I think he has said a lot of things to remind us of what has happened. But I would like us to go back a little bit back into history, because this history is important, especially for young people who are not aware of where we've come from and how we got to where we are. Now, the first thing to point out is that in 1986, when the NRM and President Museveni came to power, they introduced that thing called no-party politics, or movement politics. And if my memory serves me right, and I was a young adult at the time. I was following very closely, and I remember even very clearly what happened in 1980 that triggered the war that brought the NRM and President Museveni to power. But when they captured power, they introduced no-party politics, and the grounds for doing that were, in my estimation, really sound, because we had had about 2 decades we had been independent for 24 years. 8 of those 24 years, we had Idi Amin. There had been no political parties, and actually Idi Amin had presumed to have banned politics itself. Now, the 16 years before that had been characterized by a lot of instability involving a lot of conflicts being stirred up by political parties, as those who are old enough or those that have read the history would recall. Politics was really organized along religious and other sectarian lines. And the NRM comes to power and says, guys, we don't have to go back there. Let's set up a system that allows us to heal from all those wounds of the past where politics was really a battlefield. So what they did, and this really did convince people, because we had seen what had happened in 1980. 1980 was really shabby. Multi-party politics left a very, very bitter taste in the mouths of many people. So when the NRM comes up with the idea of no-party politics, people are very eager to embrace this idea. And then they move on and invite their potential rivals from the older parties, the Democratic Party, UPC, to join them and work together in the reconstruction of the country, and promising that at some point when the country would be ready, we would return to multi-party competition. Now, we need to appreciate one thing, which is that no-party politics lasted a whole 20 years. Now, how did we move from no-party politics back to multi-partyism? Now, this came as a result, in my estimation, of some of the people that the NRM and President Museveni had invited into this broad tent called the NRM, losing confidence in the NRM or the movement as the vehicle that would deliver us to multi-party politics without a fight, because it had been assumed that it would happen naturally. Now, this came about as a result of the behavior of some individuals within the NRM and President Museveni himself. Now, they were proclaiming that Uganda had a no-party system, but they were actually behaving towards the other non-original NRM people as if they were a political party. And as time went on, it became very clear that the NRM was masquerading as being part of this no-party system, but actually the NRM was behaving as a political party. Now, this undermining of the confidence of the non-NRM people that had joined the movement inevitably led us to pressure now on the government and the NRM for the country to return to multipartyism, because people argued that there was no use pretending that we were in a no-movement system when the NRM was behaving as a political party. And with time, the NRM, or rather the government, became virtually a one-party government. And so we saw the exit of some actors from DP, especially the main actors being Paul Semogiri and others, I think the Cecilia Wells and all those. I have forgotten the other individuals, but the fact of the matter that I'm trying to point out is that there was an exit from the broad tent of people who had lost confidence in the NRM and in President Museveni's management of the country. And then pressure for a return to multipartyism began to grow. Now, it began to grow both within the country as people became more and more disenchanted with the NRM, and then it came also from externally, from development partners that read the environment to be one of single partyism and that thought that it was only fair that the country should return to multi-party politics where different political organizations would compete on an equal footing. So this is what leads us to the return of multipartyism. But we should also remember that this was resisted by a lot of people within the movement or the original NRM, led by President Museveni, in spite of a few individuals constituting a rather small minority supporting a return to multipartyism, among whom was Bidandi Sali and others that you and others may remember. Now, President Museveni said something very significant after we had had the referendum and the decision was made to return to multipartyism. He said he did not believe in multipartyism. And he had only acquiesced with this pressure to return the country to multi-party politics because of donor pressure. Now, we really need to take note of that. He has never been a friend of multipartyism. He did not accept a return to multipartyism with equanimity. He actually vowed to make it very difficult for multi-party politics to thrive in the country. And now that's one thing. Now, the next thing is that the 20 years of no-party politics did have a very negative effect on the pre-existing political parties, particularly DP and UPC, because they were confined only to Kampala and they were not allowed to go beyond Kampala. They were not allowed to sponsor candidates. They were not allowed to recruit new members. They were not allowed to have their periodic meetings that political parties should have. In essence, they were not allowed to be political parties. Now, this had a very negative effect in the sense that a lot of the leaders of these political organizations that the NRM had found in place became old and therefore no longer very active. Because they were not recruiting members, the old leaders could not be replaced by younger ones. Because they were not allowed to be political parties, they were not allowed to raise money, so they were absolutely broke. So by the time the country returns to multi-party politics, the parties are virtually dead, or they are completely disabled. They had to recruit new members, they had to recruit new leaders, and those with clear memories would remember that we then had fights within these parties, leadership fights, or fights over leadership. Now, a lot of these parties then acquired new leaders who had no experience of running political parties, and that really became a problem. But beyond that, the population also had kind of transformed in a very specific sense, in the sense that the 20 years of no-party politics where the government and the NRM promoted what they called individual merit, had conditioned the population now to actually believe, not believe in parties, but believe in individuals. And I think that up to today, in many cases, people do not elect candidates on the basis of which party they belong to, but on the basis of who this person is, what they're able to share with them in terms of goods and money. So the individual merit thinking has lingered on, and that has also been very disadvantageous to political parties because, let's face it, there are very few Ugandans who are willing to give their money to political parties. There are very few Ugandans who buy party paraphernalia, T-shirts and caps and party cards. And of course, the NRM then set the precedent by giving out its own membership cards free of charge. Now, that has made it very difficult for political parties to raise money. Political parties are mainly broke much of the time, so they are not able to do those things that political parties in a functioning multi-party system should be doing, which is to renew their leaderships, to recruit people, to build structures, and do all the things that political parties should do. Now, after the return to multi-party politics, political parties in Uganda, besides the NRM, have really struggled to overcome all these impediments within a very hostile environment that is designed to make them fail, or that is designed to make multi-party politics fail. And then in the midst of political parties not being able to raise money, there has been a very significant commercialization of politics, or monetization of politics. And we all know that it's very difficult for a candidate in any party to be elected without spending vast amounts of money. Now, this has made it very difficult for opposition parties, but not for the NRM, because the NRM draws on state resources. It benefits from use of state assets. We all know that the NRM holds its party meetings in State House. I have never seen a country where the government abuses national assets in that kind of way. And I have asked some of my friends in the NRM what they feel about this abuse of national assets. How can a party hold its meetings in State House? State House doesn't belong to a political party. State House belongs to the country. If the NRM wants to hold its meetings in State House, they could as well open up State House for other parties to hold their meetings there too. So the abuse of national resources, or the use of national resources and national assets by the NRM, has compounded the disadvantages that other parties face. Now, parties are pretty much unable to raise money because there is a law that restricts raising money by political parties from outside the country, especially from countries that may be deemed to be hostile. But we know, and this information is in the public domain, that President Museveni raises money for the NRM from foreign countries. And this has been written in the newspapers. He has raised money from Gulf states. He has got money from Sudan. He has got money from various places. This is public knowledge because it's been written about in the media. But political parties are not allowed, or it's not made easy for them to raise money. And some of the people who could give money to political parties fear to do that because should they be found out, chances are they're going to be victimized. But of course, we know that there are those that give money to political parties in secret. But for the most part, people are really reluctant to fund opposition political parties for fear of being victimized. Now, the other thing that has happened that has really put parties in difficulty is the turning of politics into a job. There is a lot of joblessness in Uganda. So joining politics is now a job. It's a source of livelihood. People struggle. People fight so hard. People take loans. People sell their assets. People sell their houses in order to run for parliament. Now, this has meant that becoming a member of parliament or getting a party card to run under the flag of a political party is almost a do and die issue. If people don't get these cards to run as candidates, they leave parties, they join other parties, they then begin to engage in guerrilla tactics against the parties that they have left. So in sum, given this background, it's not surprising that we see the things we see within the parties, but also the things we see that parties experience in terms of the harassment by the government, by security agencies, because clearly the return to multipartism was not accepted with grace by President Museveni and some of his allies in the NRM, but also in the security agencies. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Frederick. You paint thanks very much for the historical context. A lot of us, imagine, who didn't know a thing or two, have picked something. You paint a very bleak picture. Then one wonders why the ever increasing appetite to start new political parties, but also Ugandans, the high support for political parties by Ugandans. And I'll give you, so in terms of people starting political parties, Uganda has 26 registered political parties. But as of May, the beginning of May, thereabouts, nine other political parties had registered. So if they conclude the processes, which involve collecting signatures, we will come to 33 political parties. So that's at the point of starting political parties. Afrobarometer in July last year put out results of a poll showing that the support for multi-party politics in Uganda has grown from 42% in 2002 to 77% in 2024, and that Uganda is ranks highly or amongst African countries for its support for multi-party politics. What may explain that a contradictory situation? On one hand, political parties are not allowed to function. They look like bad business. On the other, people are starting new political parties, and Ugandans' support for them seems to be high, even though there's a sense that it's waning.
Let me start with why people support political parties. In my opinion, this reflects disenchantment with the NRM and President Museveni rather than specifically a support for political parties. As people get more and more disillusioned about the NRM, they react by supporting its opponents. That's a demonstration of opposition to the NRM rather than actual support for political parties. And as I pointed out before, support for political parties is supposed to be demonstrated by people becoming members, buying membership cards, buying party merchandise, contributing money to the budgets of political parties. Very few Ugandans do this. So the support is only lip service. But I think that the more important thing is that demonstration of support for political parties is at the same time demonstration of opposition to disenchantment with the NRM. Now, why do we see an increase in the number of political parties? Now, there are two interesting things here that we need to take note of. The first one, and Haggai, I'm sure you know this, some of these parties are actually helped to come up by the NRM because that's a very sharp weapon it uses to disorganize other parties. They will sponsor as many parties as possible. For instance, the more parties they sponsor, the more it becomes inconsequential which political party boycotts elections. Because if, say, the major parties, PFF, and UPC, if they boycotted elections, there will be so many other parties that are going to participate. Now, I can remind you of, do you remember what Ochegere's party was? Do you remember the name? I don't remember the name. But Ochegere's party came up and very quickly registered, and then Ochegere made a show of running for president. What happened after? He was appointed ambassador. There are many people that have come up with these kinds of things, and they end up being co-opted into the NRM. But also, the other thing is that a lot of politicians are actually quite naive about multi-party politics. So they form parties as some kind of demonstration to the parties they have left that we can actually also form, establish political parties that can rival the parties that we have left. What they don't take into account is what it takes to run a political party successfully. They do really underestimate what it takes to run a party. And I'm sure you know of so many dead political parties. If you look, for instance, now at the Democratic Front, there is Mr. Mabike in the Democratic Front. Mabike used to have his own political party. What happened to it? There is Abedwanika in that group. He used to have his own political party. What happened to it? The Makaku Luvega at some point was running as an independent. Then he goes to DP, goes to this other party. So there is this nomadism. The nomadism demonstrates, first of all, the naive belief that you can start a political party and then recruit members and then you can run for president and maybe win. But it doesn't work that way. And we have seen this in practice. The other thing is political parties can be formed as instruments of the ruling government or the ruling party designed to achieve so many objectives, one of which is to disorganize existing political parties. They foment dissension within these parties, ensure they split, and then people form small other groups. In the process, they weaken parties that would have posed some kind of competition. But they also establish political parties in order to safeguard themselves against any possible boycott of elections by the major parties. Because if all parties were to boycott an election, its legitimacy comes into question. But say if the major parties were to boycott the elections in the current environment, there are so many small parties, many of them dormant, which will be revived, and they're going to participate, and the whole thing will seem like, yeah, we have a legitimate outcome of the elections. So for me, that's the way I see it.
Thank you very much. Yes, and for those who may not know, the Ochegere that was being referred to is Nelson Ochegere. His party, the party he started was Action Party in 2004. Of course, Ochegere went on to become a High Commissioner, I think, for Nigeria, Ugandan High Commissioner for Nigeria, and until recently he served as the head of mission in Russia, for Uganda in Russia. Yeah, just information there. I'll come back to you, Kaija, now. Do you want to complete your thoughts where you had left off, and then I ask you a question, or should we start with a question?
I actually just wanted to add something small on Dr. Goloba's submission. He's asking about the different parties like Ochegere's. But I also wanted to ask what happened to PDP, I think. Is it PDP? Abed Wanka's party? Because I think for me, that one is even more interesting. Because Abed, he has been, I don't know that he's still a member of NUP, but in the last elections he contested under NUP. And as we speak, I think he's been moving around with the Democratic, is it Democratic Alliance, DA, the one of Honorable Mathias Impuga. So I'm also wondering what happened actually to PDP. And I think for me, this really just confirms what Dr. Golova has been talking about. But for me, more broadly, when you talk about the statistics that we are referring to of Afrobarometer, I'm going to say something that is quite dangerous for someone that engages in research. But these statistics, and I'm not questioning Afrobarometer's statistics, because really that is a very credible source of data that we use in research. But the whole question of statistics around our governance, I think is something that we really need to take with a pinch of salt. I'm reminded by an article which was written by Dr. Munini Mulera some time back, I think about 10 or 15 years back, when people were talking about Museveni winning the elections, and he said something really interesting that, discussing statistics in an election that is organized by Museveni is like discussing who the best student is in a university where sex for marks works. So again, discussing governance statistics, whether it is about belonging to political parties or who is winning elections or which party has more members, is more or less the same thing. Because just recently, in the analysis that we did that idea, we found that the people that, or the members that the parties in Uganda, the current political parties claim to be having, if you total them together, there will be almost 38 million members, whereby the NRM alone, on their membership register, they claim to be having 20.7 million members. Now, if you look at the most recent national census data, you realize that we have almost 22.5 million people that will be eligible to participate in the next elections as voters. So the question is, does the NRM claim to be having almost 90% or 95% of the entire voting population on its register? If you look at the voters register of the last elections, the Electoral Commission, I think, had 18.1 million people. The NRM register had 18.3 million people, more than the number of registered voters in the whole country. If you look at the membership of the different political parties, because I think NUP is saying they have about 10 million, either 10 or 12 million members. UPC says they have 6 million. FDC has a certain percentage. Now, if you add all that up, it actually takes you to almost something like 40 million people in a country with a population of, I think the current census is talking about 45 million people. So really these statistics about membership to political parties, people subscribing to political parties, who is winning, in a system that I think myself and Dr. Golowa Mtevi has tried to paint in the introduction, it's quite difficult. It brings us to a difficult position whether we can actually rely on these statistics that we are referring to or not. But yeah, Haga, you can proceed with your question.
Yeah, I'll take you. You wanted to talk about the financing, and Dr. Agolova talked a little bit about the challenges that political parties find in terms of raising funding. The amendments to the Political Parties and Organizations Act, if assented to, because Parliament passed them on May 20th. The President hasn't signed it for it to become an act. But it basically bars political parties that do not subscribe to IPOD, or the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, from accessing government funding. Now, a bit of background: the major political parties, including the National Unity Platform and the Democratic Forum for Democratic Change, have always distanced themselves from IPOD, citing state capture and bias in favor of the ruling party. By formalizing IPOD and making membership to it a condition for funding, there's a sense that government effectively wields financial leverage to coerce party behavior and possibly penalize dissent. What these are concerns out there, but what's your reading of these amendments and the potential impact?
I think I'll say two things. First of all, is that the last I checked, iPod was an institution. It was a company limited by guarantee, more or less like an NGO. And I'm really wondering where government would get the locus to put a provision in the law that conditions a political party to belong to an NGO. It's really, really strange that government or even parliament can pass such a provision. Because the last I checked is iPod was a forum where parties are supposed to belong voluntarily. They are brought together by an MOU. And so that's why entities like NOOP have said, we don't find this as a credible platform to belong to, of course, because of the manner in which it has been run in the past. And I think even the host entity, which is the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy, NIMD, which used to host it before, has actually lately distanced itself from it and stopped supporting it, because that entity was being run in a manner that does not really meet democratic standards. It was actually failing to deliver its aspirations, because at some point it actually got captured. Now, in terms of the implications of that, of course, it's really strange. And no, maybe it's not even surprising that we are having laws being put in place to target certain individuals or certain political parties. Without even reading that law, at least with the little that I have seen in terms of the commentary in the press, is that this party is actually responding to NOOP's refusal to belong to iPod. I think at the time when NOOP was being conditioned to belong to iPod, iPod was being chaired by the NRM, and NOOP had put certain conditions before it could subscribe to iPod. And those conditions were not met, and because of that, NOOP said we cannot associate with, under a framework that is not, or where we cannot guarantee that we shall be able to enjoy our democratic rights, or even whether it will not make sense for us to be able to pursue our objectives. So, of course, we know that the proposal to deny NOOP access to the funding that they've been getting from the Electoral Commission came through some time back, and I think iPod proposed it, but there was no legal locus for government to really be able to enforce that. So clearly, right now we are seeing NOOP, yes, it has been accessing this funding, but it is failing to play ball, maybe just like the other parties that belong to iPod that have been receiving this kind of funding are also doing. So how do? We then target them through a legislation and any other party like that. Because if you come to iPod, you'll be required probably to behave in a certain manner. If you can't behave in such a manner, then either we throw you out or something like that. And of course, government knows that, maybe the regime knows that if NOOP probably is again in the lead in the opposition in the next term, they will have access to resources, and if they use those resources to continue to strengthen themselves, then clearly that won't be good for them. But also, I need to remind you that there is another, let me call it bogus bill that had been introduced sometime last year by, what is his name? There's an MP that was introducing something about the manner in which the leader of opposition is elected. So, and again, that was targeting NOOP. So clearly you can see that there are all these legal maneuvers to try and target a certain political group or a certain political party. So it doesn't surprise us, but for me, that's really what I can say about that amendment. And of course, if it goes through, it will have serious consequences for NOOP, but also other political formations that I imagine that might operate like NOOP, for instance, the PFF.
Thank you very much, Job. I'll give a few pointers or information about iPod. It was founded or formed in 2009 and legally incorporated in 2021. And it was established to promote good governance, human rights, and institutional strengthening of political parties. It was, of course, created with support from the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. President Museveni still holds, I think, the chairmanship. It's supposed to be rotational, its leadership, but he has not, since 2020, he has not left. He has been there. And some of the members have been complaining, including the UPC president. But important to note is that in 2022, there was a meeting with the iPod Council secretary generals. Museveni attended and warned that NUP, this is 2022, that NUP and FDC risked being excluded from public funding for refusing to engage with IPOD. He's quoted in one of the articles saying, it should be in the law. Those who don't want to be part of the forum should not share that money. In May this year, the law is here. I wanted to come to you, Dr. Frederick. The developments in other political parties, of course, they face all these challenges, but some of the Ugandans here listening would like to know if there's in the opposition, and some of this is because of things like that President Museveni has said after the 2016 elections, he said he vowed to wipe out opposition political parties. So there's a sense of pessimism, and the ruling party functionaries bandy about statements like, oh, the opposition is finished, they are disorganized, they are all these things. Are there developments in some of the opposition political parties that give you optimism?
Thank you very much, Haggai. Before I go to that, I wanted us to revisit iPod a little bit, because again, I think that the history would be useful for us to understand where we are and why we are where we are. Now, of course, iPod was started by the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. And in its early days, the NRM was really skeptical of it, if not outrightly opposed to it. Now, when iPod started offering money to political parties, which money was being provided by the Democratic Governance Facility, which was then harassed and rendered inexistent by the government, the NRM refused to take this money because they didn't feel that they should be taking money from foreign actors, quote unquote. But the other parties continued to be funded, and people may have forgotten this or they may not be aware. The DGF funding of parties via iPod did create some problems for political parties, some of which misused this money and again ended up being sanctioned by DGF. But there was also another problem, which was that iPod was not funding political parties to do those things that they thought were necessary for them to do as political parties. iPod was actually deciding what they were going to fund. So in many ways, whereas iPod did contribute somewhat to the development and evolution of political parties, it also constrained them in many ways because of constraints imposed by donors regarding what could be funded and what couldn't be funded, but they were also, of course, constrained by financial mismanagement within their own ranks. And then there came a time when the parties were very much supportive of iPod as a forum through which they could engage with each other, get to know each other, pursue common interests, and also sort out their differences. And there were provisions for heads of political parties to meet. They called them the summit, to meet periodically to exchange ideas and those kinds of things. And now here, the NRM was the one blocking this, because for many years, party leaders wanted to meet President Museveni, and either he would refuse to meet them, or he would invite them to State House. Now, political party leaders felt that being invited to State House to meet President on his own ground was something of a capitulation on their part. And they didn't want to appear to be inferior to the NRM. They considered themselves equal to the NRM. Party leaders considered themselves equal to President Museveni, of course, which he rejected alongside his own political party. So that was the status of iPod for many years. The NRM was there reluctantly and mainly played a blocking function. But at the same time, the NRM then promoted the consultative forum, which was even included in the constitution. The trouble with the consultative forum is that, again, it could only meet when President Museveni or the NRM or the government wanted it to meet. And in many cases, when meetings were convened, President Museveni would turn up very late. Now, I remember, the one meeting I remember was held in that hotel in Entebbe. Now I forget what, Protea Hotel. And some party leaders went there, others refused to go. I remember very well, Norbert Mao very controversially went there amidst protests by members of DP. These guys arrived at that hotel, some arrived mid-morning, others early afternoon. President Museveni turned up at 8 p.m. and then proceeded to give them a lecture, and then they had a photo opportunity, and that was the end of it. And since then, the forum hasn't been functioning. Now, I regard this law, which has been passed, as signaling a change of heart on the part of the NRM. The NRM, I think, the more it comes under pressure from the other parties and the more people become disenchanted towards it and the more they seem to embrace its opponents, the more it seems now to believe or to have bought into the idea that there needs to be a consultative forum where parties can talk to each other. Now, personally, I think that there is some potential good in this. If we could have a forum where parties meet to talk to each other in a mutually respectful way, where they discuss matters of national importance, where they identify things that they agree on that bring them together, that unite them, where they then begin to want to sort out their differences amicably so that we can have a functioning multi-party system. For me, that would be a good thing. I don't see the requirement for parties to belong to IPOD as a negative thing necessarily. And on this, I really disagree with NUP. If I were a member of NUP or a leader in NUP, I would urge NUP to remain in IPOD, because not only is that going to continue giving them access to party funding, because party funding is restricted to only those parties that are represented in parliament. And I think that also is a good idea. Because then if they funded each and every party of the 36 or 26 that you mentioned, I'm not sure they would have enough resources to do it. I'm not sure it would be very useful. But if a political party has got members of parliament and has proved its bona fides, then there is room for that party to be funded, or there is justification for that party to be funded by the state. But this funding also it has some very interesting peculiarities. The NRM opposed funding of parties by the government for a very long time because they had access to government funding. But then at some point they then came out and agreed that the government should fund political parties. And then they put in a requirement that parties should be funded proportionately to their representation in parliament. Now, the larger the number of MPs a party has, the more money it takes. And of course, the NRM has the largest number of members, and so it takes the lion's share of this money. Now, NUP is the second largest. NUP gets significant resources from that source. And for me, I think that if they continue to reject membership in this forum, it will be a mistake. Because this forum, if parties were to meet there on a regular basis, talk to each other, it would allow them to get to know each other. It would dissipate some of the suspicions that they have of each other. But of course, that would depend on how the NRM, the dominant party, behaves. And if you asked me if I trust the NRM to behave correctly, I'm not sure I do. But if we had several parties in there, the other parties might prevail sometimes by sheer force of numbers and disadvantage the NRM. But I don't particularly see it as a negative thing. Now let's go to your question. You did ask a question now, which I have forgotten. If you could ask the question again.
Oh, my question was whether you see, whether despite all this, despite this climate, the obtaining environment, whether you see developments in opposition political parties that give you hope that a multi-party dispensation has a future here.
I do have some hope that multipartyism has a future in Uganda. But we are not going to get there easily. We are not going to get there without bloodshed. We are not going to get there without violence. And what we see today really does point in that direction. We have some parties that seem to me to be going about the business of evolving into functioning political organizations the right way. And here I could cite UPC. UPC is very quiet. But I get the sense that Jimmy Akena is doing some serious groundwork to try and build or rebuild UPC from the ground up. They have been very clever about avoiding any fights with the NRM, so they are not beaten, they are not prevented from holding meetings. So in a way, they are enjoying some kind of space within which they can evolve in a positive way. I see the same with ANT. ANT is a small party, but again, they strike me as a party that is serious about building structures, recruiting people, and not rushing into sponsoring presidential candidates, which is one of the major weaknesses of political parties in Uganda. I see NUP, for me, as a very good representation of a political party led by people who are serious about building a political organization. And does it really not surprise many that this party, given how young it is, already has a headquarters. It has a school of governance. It has these very committed members, these young people who are beaten, abducted, molested, but they just keep going. I understand that when NUP was prevented from engaging in any political activities following the 2021 elections, and then PLU was given all the space to go around holding parties and various events, the assumption was that PLU was going to take away young people from NUP, because after all, it was led by a youthful leader and it had all these youthful members. But remember that when they tried to test whether that had worked and let NUP go east via Mbale, Soroti in the north, and then had this mega rally in Ruwero, it seemed to me as if the numbers behind NUP had actually grown. in spite of them being shackled, in spite of PLU being given all the space. And all indications even today suggest that NUP is a growing political organization. And NUP seems to me to be the favorite political organization of a lot of young people. Now, of course, there is this claim, highly debatable, that NUP is a Uganda party, or some people go as far as referring to it as Kabaka Ika. But we see that whenever NUP is allowed to go outside Uganda, they have the same large turnouts as they do in Uganda. So I think that in spite of all the harassment, the molestation and the abductions and the raiding and vandalizing of their offices, NUP to me seems to have a bright future. And this is mainly my reading of the kind of commitment that these young people that support this organization have shown. They have refused to back down in spite of all the violence that is being directed at them. So yeah, in a sense, I do have some optimism that multipartyism will come to Uganda. That it will work. That is probably in the distant future. But I also look at the NRM as more or less, the NRM is going to evolve. Some people say it's going to collapse. I think the NRM will probably become a much more reduced political organization after President Museveni leaves the scene. Now, depending on who is going to lead this organization, I think the NRM still has a lot of potential. But unfortunately, the minute they will no longer have free access to state resources, they're going to struggle like everyone else. But the 40 years they have had to organize themselves, to develop a certain kind of dominance by sheer dependence on the state and state institutions, will give them a lot of mileage for many years to come. I'm not a great believer in conventional multi-party politics in Africa or in poor countries, but that's what we have chosen in Uganda, and I'm fairly optimistic that eventually we will get there, but we are not going to get there easily or in a trouble-free fashion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will just give numbers in case someone is wondering. This money people are talking about, what is it? 2022, the NRM got 17 billion. NUP got 3.1 billion. FDC got 1.7 billion. The DP got 485 billion. UPC got 485 billion. JEMA got 53 billion. And the Progressive Party also got 53 million. JEMA so DP 485 million, UPC 485 million, JEMA 53 million, People's Progressive Party 53 million. Sorry, it's not billion, but for NRM it's 17 billion, NUP 3.1 billion, FDC 1.7 billion. And NUP is not a member of the IPOD. It has refused to join the IPOD because of some of the things that the contradictions around its leadership and how under President Museveni, how the entity has been run. But because of the members, NUP has about 57 members of parliament. It has the second largest number of MPs in parliament. And that's the criteria that's followed in distributing this money. So I'll open the debate to our audience for questions. Henry, are we seeing any speakers? Help me identify some if you're able. If you have a question, please let us know. I see Oite, Emmanuel. Oite, would you like to ask your question, make a comment? Please make it as brief as you can.
Yes, thank you, Agai. For me, the debate is very, very interesting, especially what Professor Golova was talking about. But for me, I think it would be very unfair to analyze the history of Uganda and maybe the emergence of political party and their conditions right now without understanding where Uganda is. To me, I think even NRM that it's not a political party, because the situation in Uganda for now does not allow a political party to emerge. A peripheral economy like Uganda can't really allow a political party to emerge, because when you look at the future of our economy, we are not yet in production. We actually literally rely on foreign funding. We have weak institutions. And how the parties don't emerge in such circumstances? Because political parties, historically, they represent interests of different people. You've got the working class have their party. You have the liberals. You have the other one. It's about interest. That's why political parties in Uganda from 1962. It's about individuals. It's about tribes. It's about a tiny sectarian class, either the church or something like that. So for me, I think what we have in Uganda, what I want to clear is we don't have political parties. What we have, maybe we can qualify them as, I would call them liberation movements, now like the NRM itself. Because when you look at that, the debate Museveni brought in Tanzania, not even Museveni, it was Bin Aissa, when they brought the umbrella organization, the umbrella that today NUP is using. perhaps should be an idea of Binaisa in 70s in Tanzania, because they believe that Uganda, the situation was not yet right. They wanted people to be one umbrella organization where we could all articulate our interests within there, because they had learned that political parties had divided Uganda from 1962, not until when Idi Amin overthrew Obote. So for me, I thought those guys were really very smart. The problem now that when NRM came, it came, and Museveni was aware of that history. But the mistake was when the movement system came, which was supposed to encompass everyone, the likes of Cecilia Wald, the Dr. Uli Park, the Agri Awori that Professor Glover cited, for them they were believers in the multi-party politics, because that's what was brought in 1980 during the election. Obote, I think, united with Nyerere, with the Semogere, to reject the opinion of Binaisa that there should be one umbrella, the UNLF, something like that. And Obote connived with Nyerere, with Semogere, they rejected that idea because for them they thought they had a political party. But the UPC that Obote was leading was purely Protestant in northern Uganda, something. DP was a Catholic. By 1980, he had taken the image of the Uganda dominance of sort, so it couldn't even move forward. That's why UPC cannot survive beyond Obote. I am also very sure that NRM won't survive beyond 7. Even NUP won't survive beyond, if you remove Chagulanyi today from NUP, NUP will be dead. Why? What interest does it really? It doesn't represent any interest. But when you look at political parties in US and Britain and the rest, you don't hear about the founding members. It's about the interest. The Republican has something they believe in. The Democrats have something they believe in. The Labour Party have something they believe in. So those parties will always go beyond. But the economy also matters. A backward economy like Uganda can't really sustain parties because the interest is still very narrow. It's about the tribe. So for me, we should be very fair to Uganda. When you're looking at that, we should consider that at the back. But for now, maybe we need to have a discussion. How can these liberation movements, these few small groups, how can they help Uganda to grow until when we arrive at that economy that will start sustaining the politics of interest, not the narrow politics of where one takes it all. Because today, I can buy a flag in NUP. I can change today, start criticizing Museveni very unfairly or even fairly, and I get a new flag. Or come sing Museveni's name, and I'll get a flag in NRM. So it is not about interest, and members won't see me in that lane. So for me, that is the dilemma of our country. Until when we reach that level of a developed economy, that's when we shall have real parties really talking about real issues. But for now, we can't. For me, that is my
much,
thank you.
Michael Mutiaba.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, all the panelists, for the insightful analysis you've made. My question is regarding party politics only to a small extent, and to a larger extent about the future after Museveni is gone. Like you've underlined, the party system has been there more like a show. Like it wasn't really restored in a sort of real sense. It was more or less a facade. And so what we've been seeing over the past 2 decades really is the continuous illustration of that fact. We've been basically seeing all the pretense basically being revealed day by day. And my question now is, if the NRM itself, which is the ruling party, cannot survive beyond Museveni, what is the future of stability in Uganda? And I'm asking this because I'm assuming, and I think rightly so, that the NRM is Museveni, basically. If we put away all the institutional sort of regalia and all the pretense and everything else that's basically used to legitimize his rule, it's basically Museveni as a person. He's 80 now, and that means we have about 15 years at most to see the unraveling of this fiction. And my question really, if I could say it differently, is what do we see of the NRM after Museveni is gone? And if there's nothing there, what is the Ugandan state after Museveni? Like, what's the nature of the Ugandan state beyond party politics? Because this is the fiction we've had for the past 20 years. But after he's gone and the party fiction is revealed ultimately to be nothing, what next?
Thank you very much, Michael. And name me. Is a gentleman or lady, and name me. Okay, if I name me Jonan.
Yes, good evening. Am I really audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a good discussion, and I would like to start it at a broader view of like East African level. You could look at all the political parties and the interests of the people in leadership or the organizations in the leadership positions. I would say currently the region is having all opposition leaders in prison due to treason, which has been also an abused case now. One in Tanzania. I think the lady in Gabira has been also arrested in Rwanda this week. Basically is still inside. So basically, in such a terrain, we cannot have discussions of political parties and democracy going anywhere. NRM itself, the system is brittle. It's one man and the family. I don't think it can survive beyond him and be better. It's really complex for the whole region other than even looking at Uganda. A few people forming parties, it's because they are disgruntled here. Let me go and form a party. Basically, that's not a rationale to start a party. What is the basis? They don't know the magnitude of having a party started in a country and where it will lead. They are briefcase parties. So we are going into an election. We have not had any reforms. One man will elect the electoral commissioner and police will beat everyone. So on the issue of progress, there has been none on the part of political parties. Then I would like to respond to Golova's issue where he said that NUP should find a way of to be present in iPod. I would say we cannot discuss if we are fighting and your boot is on my neck. Basically, I'm in a compromised position and you're telling me to come and discuss. Tomorrow they attack their offices, the armed police is all over. They entered the Kayunga by-election, LOC5, where we had this lady and the president said he'll get what he wants. They lost, but they declared a different person. On what grounds do you want me to discuss with you? iPod is not a bad institution. It worked in Ghana. You would have cited some examples where it worked and where they had an improvement into something. What was the basis for having iPod here? What was the agenda? On the points that were listed, what did we do? Basically, this was an institution where the president stood and took photos, shared them abroad and everywhere the world to see that I'm discussing with the people who oppose me. Basically, buying him time to legitimize his activities. That are illegal. Look at Mao. If Golovi tells me about sitting and dialoguing with this man, surely he should be knowing more than me, who is just in my 30s, that this is not a man to dialogue with. Mao went there. He was appearing on every TV station. How he signed a pact to an agreement. Where is it? I think recently they said they are going to terminate it. Did he benefit from it? Or as DP or himself? So basically, what are the grounds for discussion? What was iPod for and what has it turned into? And that example I've given you, your boot is on my neck and you're telling me let's discuss. Surely, it's not a good terrain for us to do politics right now. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mugandi?
Well, thank you so much.
Keep it under a minute, please, so other people can also make a contribution.
Thank you. I can drop the mic.
I just wanted to say, it came from a comment that people seeing NUP as a Uganda issue, and I've just posted for you NUP in Busia, where I come from, and I've posted NUP where Lina Zedriga comes from. Well, I do believe there will be a fight because I come from Busia and we have ever fought, not necessarily the real fight that people know, but we're the first people to resist drones, and we have that history. And when the young people of Busia get involved, some of us believe in blood. We believe in our people. We are not going to sacrifice anyone from Busia. And I believe in what F. Kolobi has said, that there will be a fight. Thank you.
Ivan, go for it.
Thanks for sharing. I want to share my mind and pick on a few things here and there. One thing that stands out, that essentially in Uganda politics is still like in the gutters, even across all spectrum, be it opposition or government. There are no people speaking of policy issues. I've seen people complaining. Take for instance someone complaining at the helm of a party. Like if you are vying for party presidency, you should be speaking not to streamline issues. Most parties, when you become the president of the party, essentially you're going to be a presidential flag bearer, and that's the only time you have the cameras on you. You have everyone interested in seeing what you're doing, because at the time of the elections, no one is interested in following the politics. But no one talks about policies. No one has Uganda at heart. No one knows where we're going. Everyone is essentially looking for a job. And politics is the highest paying job in Uganda. And across board, no one is actually looking at Ugandans' interests. It's about getting a job and getting a contract for the next 5 years. So that's my take.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I hope the panelists have been noting the questions. Let's answer those and then pick one more or make concluding remarks, because we are soon running out of time. I'll start with you, Job. Feel free to respond to any of the questions here.
Yeah, I think one interesting point that has been made by Jonan is on the iPod, and I also had really a response to Dr. Golova. Dr. Golova is really, I think he's quite a good Christian. I don't know whether he's a Christian or, but faith. He has a lot of faith. I mean, you look at iPod, an entity which has not had its summit in 4 years. Actually, ever since President Museveni became the chairperson, it hasn't held its annual summit. I think the leadership of iPod is supposed to be rotational, either every 6 months or so, meaning that since 2020, when President Museveni became the chairperson of iPod, it should have changed leadership minimum 4 times, but that has not happened. The same thing as, of course, his presidency. Ever since he became president of the country, we have also not changed leadership. So clearly, he has taken his, for the lack of a better word, let me say bad manners in terms of refusing to transition into iPod. And now you are conditioning political parties through a law to become members to that entity that I think is at the moment almost defunct. I think for me it's really quite it's foolhardy for us to really expect anything meaningful to come out of such a platform, considering the manner in which it is captured now. I need to agree with you, Dr. Golova, that iPod is a brilliant concept, and like Jonan really did mention, it has worked in other countries really well. But of course, when you subject it to your local politics of patronage, divide and rule, and capture, then you actually lose the whole essence of it. Like Jonan asks, if my boot, if your boot is on my head, how can you call me to the negotiation table and expect me to dialogue with you from a position of comfort? But also, I want to remind us that we had a great opportunity in a process called the National Dialogue Process, which we thought really, and I think up to now really I believe that is what needs to happen for this country to be able to heal from the pain it is going through, and also to really chart a proper course. That, I mean, the question which Jonan asks of what does the future of the country look like with the NRM, which looks like it may collapse anytime soon, especially if Museveni leaves. And I think for me, we need really to get onto into some sort of national conversation. We had an opportunity around 2016, 17, when the Elders Forum, the Interreligious Council, civil society organizations were leading on this process. And just really to respond to your optimism, Dr. Golova. The understanding was that, of course, which I still believe, is that President Museveni is a key actor that needs to be part of that process. And yes, we did reach out. The Elders Forum, IRC, they convened, had a couple of meetings with him and his team. And I need to assure you that from the moment he actually committed and embraced the dialogue, the national dialogue, that was the beginning of its death. And up to now, we actually talk about it in terms of its history. And that is not different from what is happening to iPod. And so for me, I need to mention that when you see President Museveni embracing some of these things, you really need to lower your expectations of them, because clearly, in most cases, his intention is to kill them. And I think for me now, conditioning people to belong, I mean political parties to belong to iPod, is really more or less sending them to go there and kill their political ambitions. If iPod is really to function and be embraced by everybody, the manner in which it is operating needs to change. Right now, it is a captured entity that actually needs to be reclaimed from the leadership that is leading it, or from the captor that it's under. But fast forward, as we head into the next elections, and you asked about the future of political parties, there's something interesting that, of course, has happened in the past, but which now is emerging more visibly. The formation of militia groups, that almost a number of these parties actually now have started forming their militias. And I'll talk about the NRM. They are talking about a vote guardians group, which they have, they are recruiting. I think they are recruiting about 145,000 people to be vote guardians for the party. That seems to be mirroring what the National Unity Platform has been championing, that they are calling the Egali. Now, of course, in the past, of course, you also know that this PLU is now operating more like a militia. We have seen the kinds of things that they have been doing across, even online. I mean, the level of violence that we are seeing, even on Twitter itself, by the leader of PLU itself, who has declared that he's going to abduct people and kill certain people, and he has actually followed through that and abducted certain people and tortured them. But we have also seen a number of leaders within the National Unity Platform netting out a lot of online violence, but this has been followed through by physical violence that we are seeing in a number of locations. So for me, I see a number of these political parties actually really gearing up for some sort of violent contestation and violent engagement in the next elections, which we actually need to really be concerned about. But also for those of us that are following these things, watch out for and see how we can try to forge some interventions.
Thank you very much, Job. Dr. Goloba Mtevi?
Thank you, Haggai. Let me start with my views on iPod. I did point out the history of iPod, and I'm actually quite intimately associated with iPod because for many years I did a lot of work with iPod, and I'm very much aware of what used to happen in that organization. And if I tell you that the NRM first rejected it and then joined it and played mainly a blocking role, I know what I'm talking about. But there were also from time to time instances where party leaders would meet President Museveni and some of their issues would be dealt with. Of course, not on a permanent basis, but there used to be some positive responses. Now, for me, I understand everything that people are saying. I understand Job's skepticism. I understand Jonan's skepticism. But what we see in Uganda in terms of the violence that is occurring and the violence that is likely to occur is partly the outcome of parties refusing to talk to each other, or partly because we have a mechanism for parties talking to each other that doesn't function. Now, of course, yes, President Museveni sometimes hijacks things and renders them dysfunctional. But let's face it, President Museveni is not growing any young. I don't think that he himself thinks he's going to be around for a very long time. I don't know, I can't read his mind. I don't know what kind of country he wants to leave behind. But one thing is for sure, that the NRM, and I don't believe that the NRM is going necessarily to collapse after President Museveni goes. The NRM has, to a certain degree, is entrenched. It will take some time to die. It will never survive in the current form. I don't think it will. But what happens to the NRM in the long run will depend on what kind of leadership it is going to have after President Museveni. Will they continue to have access to state resources? Chances are they may. Again, it depends on who is going to lead it and what kind of connections they are going to have with the security agencies, what kind of control they will have over the state. It can only collapse completely or to a very large extent if the change from President Museveni goes to a completely different political organization that is hostile to the NRM. Now, for me, I think that if we want to avoid violence, if we want to avoid bloodshed, if we want to try and get multi-party politics in Uganda to evolve in a positive form, we have to try dialogue. And I wouldn't go out of my way and say, no, I can't go to iPod if I were Noop. I would go and see what is actually happening there. And if I get to feel that from my experience of being there, it's pointless, then I can leave. But I would try. And I'm not saying that I'll try because I'll be guaranteed of the outcome, but I think that if we do not try as much as we can to embrace dialogue, I think we are going to head for violence. I don't know who is going to benefit from this, but yeah, there we are. Now, the thing about what Oite mentioned of parties being tribal and what have you, I'm personally not convinced that we are in that territory anymore. That's how it was before the NRM came to power. I think that we have moved on significantly. All the parties I see, there is no single party that you can call tribal. Even the NRM, people may say it's dominated by Westerners, but that may be true or not, depending on which angle you're looking at it from. I don't see a tribal party in Uganda. Parties are weak, yes, and now that doesn't mean that because they are weak they should die or be banned. No, parties grow. They're like human beings. They evolve. They will grow in a very difficult environment, but yeah, eventually they will evolve. No party is born strong. Parties are born weak. They build, they recruit, they refine their objectives, they refine their ideology. So for me, I'm not worried about parties being as sectarian as they used to be in the past. And that's why I really don't buy this claim that somehow NUP is the Uganda party, is Kabaka and so on and so forth. Even the NRM is not necessarily a Westerner-dominated party, at least not numerically. You may see Western domination here and there, but it's not a tribal party. I wouldn't call it one. UPC is not a tribal party, nor are the others. So I will not abandon my optimism that in the thick of all this confusion that we have, the violence, the bloody-mindedness of the NRM and its misuse of the resources, that we can give up and say, look, parties can't work in Uganda. They can work depending on what happens. And I think that if we had a forum within which parties can talk to each other from a position of seriousness about building a country that we all want, then multi-party politics would evolve very nicely. But yeah, that's where we are. The challenges are there. Should we give up? I'm not sure we should.
It looks like all the comments are. I have one more question, and it's in regards to the recently concluded internal elections in the National Unity Platform. Of course, there were, concerns that the process was less transparent, that some positions were uncontested. But when you talk to some of the members, the NUP leadership, there's a sense that the party must balance democratic ideals and operational security, while also, in full understanding of the threats and the surveillance they face. So if they can have internal, agreement, if they can, have certain positions not without this, the fights that we see in other, that it helps their cohesion. What are your thoughts?
Let me go first, Haggai. I think that we must accept that NUP as a political organization faces a very serious existential threat. And this is because, from my estimation, it is the one organization that really seems to terrify the NRM. Or it is the one organization that the NRM is so determined to try and kill. Now, NUP is a young organization. NUP suffers so much harassment. I think that NUP should be led, as of now, by people who are committed to preserving it, people who are identifying 100% with its objectives. Now, what does that mean? It means exactly what they have told you, that you have to balance democracy or internal democracy with other requirements or other considerations. Now, if we had full democracy within NUP, and then Chagulanyi was voted out, Rwongoya was voted out, and all these people that have really carried this part on their heads or shoulders were voted out, who is going to come in? And how do we know that this person is going to continue struggling to keep this party alive in the same way that these individuals are? There will be a time for democracy. And again, I'm not aware of any political party within this region that is entirely democratic. Political parties need to be led by certain kinds of people. Political parties need to safeguard certain types of leaders. We can't afford to be naive and think that you can open up a political party to full democracy where everybody gets elected. I think it's naive. Parties need certain leaders who can lead them in a particular way through certain phases of life. And for me, I'm not perturbed by what happened in NUP. I would be perturbed if 20 years, 30 years from now, they are still doing the same thing. But I see this as part of the evolution of that political organization. And we see the same behavior in DP. We see the same behavior in FDC. We see the same behavior. Look, there have been leadership fights in UPC. These are teething problems for multipartyism and for these political organizations. I wouldn't be too overly concerned about it.
Haga, if I may also respond to that. I think for me, amidst the very complicated...
Job.
Yeah?
Job.
Yeah.
Let me throw in another question and you answer them at once.
Okay.
And this is about the elements that have come to characterize these internal party processes. Factional fights, personalized power struggles, breakaways. It seems the sort of glue, so mechanisms to resolve disputes internally no longer hold, and there appears that this doesn't augur well for the growth of these political parties. What would you change? What sorts of reforms internally would you recommend for some of these political parties?
Yeah, I want to say that what we see that is going on in these political parties, maybe even before saying that, NUP is doing the best that they can in the circumstances. Because like Dr. Golova has just mentioned, that NUP seems to be the party that the regime has actually just pulled out all its armor against. And so they are really operating amidst a very complicated terrain, whereby you've seen the level of infiltration, the amount of money that has been invested in dismantling them and neutralizing them, the amount of violence. So it's the party that now is actually just facing not the NRM as a party, but NRM as a state. So some of these things they are doing, and I don't really condone them, because some of them are outside what we would consider standard democratic principles. But they also seem to be really fighting for survival, considering what has happened to them in the past. And of course, it's possible for us to make the same claim about DP, which has just had a very violent election like they have never had in the past. But for me, really on that, I would say that they are really victims of the political terrain that we have been talking about. Now, in terms of the lack of... Because right now, if you look at NUP, actually, they have failed to have their constitution, which I think they drafted 2 years ago and submitted to the Electoral Commission, gazetted by the Electoral Commission. So if you asked what kind of instruments are they using to even conduct these primaries that they are doing and all the activities? It's really a bit shaky ground. So they are really trying to do maybe what Bobby Wine called Roba Doba style when he was running his People Power movement. What do political parties need to do? I think the political parties, first of all, if you look at them, they have failed to attract a certain caliber of individuals that would help them to run some of their aspects professionally. A number of these political parties are being run by politicians who only understand politics. Now, they need to be able to have an arm that runs what you'd call probably an organization that is not just really focusing on the politicking, and then also have the political arm that focuses on the outreach and mobilization. Because and I've engaged with some of these political parties over the past couple of months, and we've been asking them for things as basic as strategic plans. In fact, one of the parties told us that they do not have their strategic plan complete because they failed to realize money to get someone to edit their strategic plan. And as far as I understand, this is a serious party, by the way, with serious individuals that are leading it. I know that there are individuals that actually subscribe to this party who are some of the best editors that we have in this country, and that I'm so sure you would be willing to actually offer pro bono time. So the question of how are these political parties organizing themselves, but also leveraging on the resources that they have in terms of membership, even factoring in the realities around the financing constraints, the hostility from the regime in relation to people that would potentially finance them, etc. So I think parties need to be able to do a proper analysis of what kind of resources do they have resident in the political parties that they can actually utilize or count on to be able to organize themselves better and be able to deal with some of these challenges that we've been talking about.
Thank you very much, Job. I don't know if Dr. Golov, if you have any concluding remarks, any last thoughts about what parties and those who support them can do to advance better governance therein.
But maybe Hagai, I wanted to say just one last thing in response to what Dr. Golova said about iPod. And I'll draw from a remark that was made by Dr. Vesige some time back. And he said that the reason we go to school is to learn from others' experiences. Now, if the NRM really was interested in dialogue, I think they have a number of opportunities that have been created by others, which the party has killed by coming to them, the national dialogue, iPod, etc. So we have seen how these things have been run. For us to really imagine that we can still go to these spaces and have dialogue in the manner that we want it, I think it's quite foolhardy. If the NRM really is interested in dialogue, they can even draft a white paper on the national dialogue. They draw from the wealth of literature and processes that we have tried out in the past, and then convene a national dialogue. But to condition people to belong to iPod, which they have captured, I think really that is it's quite wishful for us to expect something meaningful to come out of that.
Thank you very much.
Hagai, for me, I just want to make one last point. From my reading of the internal workings of many of our political parties, it seems like they have not been very good at building internal consensus around whatever ideas they are trying to promote, or whatever ideology they are trying to establish internally, or whatever ideology they want to be guided by. So the fights we see are usually really not founded on values or anything, and I think that political parties could do a better job of building internal consensus. Again, when the Mpuga controversy came up within NUP, I saw for me the makings of a political party that has some common idea about what it is they want to do and what kind of political organization they want to be. The kind of pressure that was applied on NUP to deal with Mpuga's issue by sweeping it under the carpet was enormous. The fact that they were able to reject it and to stay on course in saying, look, he committed, he did something wrong, we don't approve, we are going to deal with it in the way that we see fit as a political organization. That for me is very important. If parties could be cohesive internally, they would become a little more difficult to disorganize. They would be subjected less to pressures that tear them apart, and maybe in that way they would then begin to look at how they collaborate as political organizations to face this behemoth called the NRM. But without internal consensus building, without internal coming around specific idea to which everybody subscribes, I think they're going to continue to struggle. On iPod, I will agree to disagree with Job. I think iPod has potential. But yeah, I mean, my view is that let's try and fail rather than fail to try.
Thank you very much, our panel. Thank you very much, our audience. You've been a wonderful audience. We are going to cap it here. We look forward to hosting you again, another episode of Agora discourse. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.